Welcome, welcome once again to The Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. The anthropologist Margaret Mead described a new cultural form emerging in which adults largely learn from their children. Because of the changes that have taken place in the world, quote unquote, young people everywhere share a kind of experience that none of their elders ever have had or will have. The young represent what is to come. Tom Hayden, a prominent 1960s student activist, was also a strong believer that people of his generation, housed in universities, looking uncomfortably at the world they would inherit, had the moral obligation to actively contribute toward positive change as an essential part of their existence. Hayden was quick to remind us that the greatest obstacle to the creation of a just society is not apathy or indifference, but the conviction of some that their views are the only legitimate ones. It's fairly obvious that the old order is breaking down, seeking more authoritarian leadership and acting in an increasingly dysfunctional manner here and around the world. Our guest today on The Radical Imagination is Anastasia Vlasova, a wonderful, exciting example of a new youth generation struggling to find ways to rescue modern society from destructive militarism, environmental catastrophe, Neo-Fascism, and cultural alienation. It's quite a long list there you're tackling there. Anastasia is an undergraduate student at NYU's Gallatin School of Individualized Studies and serves as junior chief of staff at Nabu, a publisher of multilingual children's books. She's a mental health activist who's involved in environmental racism and environmental justice movements and leads research, design, and communication projects focusing on reification, or people's alienation from work and their treatment as objects of manipulation rather than as human beings. Welcome. Welcome to the show. It's really a pleasure, an honor to have you, and really excited to have this dialogue with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's a pleasure.
It is. It's terrific. Now, we met at a Cornell West rally, and that was the first time that I think you met Cornell?
Yes.
And so on. So how did that strike you? And maybe tie that into some of the your experiences at NYU, because you've been in the, at a university where so much was happening. And Cornell, of course, was attempting to speak to some of those same issues. So how did that strike you? How did that relate to what he was saying? Your own experiences. And I know a lot of questions here all at once. And your experience as a Russian immigrant, in a sense.
Okay, I'll start with
first. Multi-layered.
Yeah, I think what struck me the most at the Cornell West rally was the conversation around public love. I'd never really heard of that in the context of political speech.
Anywhere.
No, yeah.
Is that something?
And that was pretty radical to me, and also something that appealed to me because I also see public love as something that is so interconnected with peace building and peaceful dialogue and negotiation and receptiveness to opinions and perspectives about the world that are different from yours, and learning how to navigate those conversations from a standpoint of acceptance and just openness. And I think that that's also tied to this concept of public love.
You call it radical love.
Yeah, radical love. Yeah, and
speaking
I think
truth to power, and what justice is, what love looks like in public.
Yeah.
Who nobody's talking like that.
No politicians.
No politicians, right?
Aren't, no. I think it struck me on a personal level as well, having been involved in mental health activism for a few years in high school and middle school and my first year or two at university, I'd always been interested in what it means to develop self-acceptance and self-love, because those topics are thrown around quite a bit, especially in the media too. They've been kind of commodified, I think, and not always explored.
In the sense.
Yeah, trivialized
Yeah.
and not explored in depth, I think. And so to raise the concept of love and also a more political context, I think kind of poses the question, how do we create structures and systems of care that enable people to develop self-love for themselves, but then also love for their communities, which is different, because I think that love for a while, at least from my experience, had been talked about in a more individual context and more so in the like well-being, wellness industry, or perhaps among mental health activists, but never so much in a political context.
One's individual success, or perhaps a relationship within a relationship. But now, you came from an environment which, a pretty tough environment there in Russia. My family on my mother's side also came from Russia, and did you find that? Now, I know you came over here when you were 5, right? But still, how do you relate to that background, the Russian background, that is a pretty tough one? Also, not that you're a spokesman for the entire generation here, but of course not. But did what you've just said here resonate with some of your friends at NYU?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that what they're searching for too, in part?
I think, at least from conversations that I've had with some of my friends, and also faculty and people who aren't in a strictly student position, a lot of people have expressed a desire for a space to engage in open dialogue and a space in which you don't feel scared to express your concerns or perhaps incomplete thoughts or perspectives on a certain topic. And so basically an opportunity to engage in far more nuanced conversation, where it's okay and it's acceptable to acknowledge the complexities of the human experience, and there isn't so much a duality of black and white, right or wrong, but instead there's an acknowledgement that many issues that are facing the world today exist in kind of this liminal gray area where there isn't a clear right or wrong, you know?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. However, looking at some of the protests on your campus and Columbia and other places, and I've been to those campuses, I'm involved with my own protests, the Vietnam War and so on, and we certainly had an authoritarian fringe there too. But what I've noticed, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is much of what you're talking about doesn't really exist in this movement, this so-called, well, what would you call it, anti-war movement of sorts. I mean, I don't see the nuance. I think that it's so polarized, and the anger and hatred, quite frankly, that comes out is mind-boggling to me. It's scary at times. I mean, you know what I'm saying? The disconnect between what you've just said and that some of your friends and colleagues or so are interested in that radical love, and yet when it comes to crunch time, it's pretty brutal out there.
Yeah.
The protests have been pretty authoritarian. I'm not going to listen to your side. So what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder if one of the obstacles to exhibiting and practicing this public love is the fact that the crisis going on with Palestine and Israel is so urgent, you know? I mean, people's lives are at stake.
Right.
And public love just seems like it requires far more time to develop. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something that you can implement overnight.
But at the very least, to see both sides. And
Sure,
the
yeah.
professors need to do that, and to have courses and forums and teach-ins and so on, which I don't think has really happened in most of these places. And as a result, you have incredibly harsh rhetoric and feelings coming out, making the situation worse, seems to me. I understand what you're saying here in terms of the urgency, but, you know, what about the nuanced conversations that we need to have, which the Israelis need to have, Gazans, Americans, and so on? Is it that we're not serious enough to do that? And I guess I'm getting more to the Russian, getting back to the Russian, which is a, you know, a serious culture in a sense. We trivialize a lot of things and commodify things, reify things, as you point out. So, or we do a whole bunch of new age stuff and that passes for, I don't know, whatever. But you seem to be talking about the need to go a lot deeper.
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about longevity and human flourishing, and how public love fits into that, and also how peace building and communication fit into all of that. Because I think what I'm most interested in, and what my closest peers seem to be interested in as well, is how do you support people in developing the fundamental skills to be able to have such nuanced conversations, you know? How do we develop that?
Well, how did you develop that?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any
well,
means.
No, but it gets us into the school that you attended, individualized studies. Now, how did that come about? And you've worked at this, right? You've worked on communication skills and empathy and so on. Through your programs in high school as well?
Well, I got involved in all of this more self-directed work, hence the individualized study program, by way of mental health activism. So
What is that?
Sure, it can take many different forms, but at least the way that I practiced it, I guess, during my high school years was I first applied to be a keynote speaker for this mental health organization's gala in Washington, D.C. And my speech was accepted. It was selected to be the keynote. And so I presented there. And I subsequently started my high school's first mental health club, basically to raise awareness around mental health issues and start a dialogue with my peers about what is it that they're feeling, what is it that they're scared about, what is it that they need greater support with, and how can faculty perhaps help with that. And that kind of spurred a general destigmatization of mental health, at least in my school. And I continued that work on social media primarily, where I led a mental health blog for this organization that I got in touch with called This Is My Brave, which combines the performing. This Is My Brave.
Okay, This Is My Brave.
And it combines the performing arts with mental health activism by having people audition with various performance pieces. So that could be a piece of poetry or just a keynote speech or a play or stand-up comedy. That basically helps them tell their story when it comes to mental illness, because the issue is that, and now it's a little bit different because several years have passed, but a lot of people who were diagnosed with mental illness felt like they had to conceal that about them, and that it was something to be ashamed about rather than embraced and kind of accepted as, you know, this is part of my reality, part of my identity, but not totally definitive.
You would go so far as to call it mental illness within a physiological or medical psychiatric.
Yeah, as in they're diagnosed, exactly.
Not emotional problems of living or loneliness, depression.
Well,
But
those
it goes-
conversations would.
Yeah, that's what you're dealing with. So now, I'm jumping, actually we're moving further backward here, but
Okay.
in a sense, how much do you think your own struggles and your energy that you had to put forth as a young child coming here, uprooted from a very different society and culture? You did not come from a privileged background. You may want to get into that. Your mother came over first, and as you were saying, worked many jobs to support you and your sister, and your father stayed at Rush. I mean, there's a lot of things going on here, trying to become more assimilated, buying the American dream. You are obviously very, very bright and excellent student, and you saw that as a key to moving ahead and fulfilling your dreams. And at the same time, intense pressure, as many, many students throughout the university world, but particularly elite colleges, are feeling. So you brought all of that with you.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
That's true.
So, and somehow you found the strength and resiliency to delve deeply into yourself, and then as a result, you're able to extend that self-knowledge into the podcast and to working with other people who are feeling similarly. Where does that all lead to for you personally and maybe even professionally, or as a society? Is this something, again, back to Cornell West, this is something we need to, obviously, it seems, more fully develop within our entire culture? And how does one do that? You've done a lot of writing about social movements and leadership and how to bring that about. Sorry, I just give you throw a bunch of questions all at once here, but
no, that's okay. Yeah, I guess resilience and kind of intense independence and the individualism that comes with intense independence have been pervasive themes throughout my life. And
I mean, you come across very mellow.
that's interesting.
You do, and but you're pretty intense. You were a tennis player. You were involved in chess. I mean, all kinds of. You're very competitive, right? Too.
Yeah.
I mean, that energy is what people talk about in terms of the American dream. Work hard, regardless of your background, you're going to make it. You were on board with that for.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of saw extreme independence as one of the only ways to move myself out of the financial situation that my family was in, and also as kind of the sole way to evade also the emotional turmoil of growing up in a pretty divided family.
Right. In the suburbs of Virginia, right?
Yeah, the suburbs of Northern Virginia. So we grew up in a pretty competitive environment. I went to public school. However, I did the IB diploma program, which is the most advanced classes that you can take. And so it was really rigorous. And in general, there was a sense of competition among ambitious students to get into top universities. A lot of people did kind of glorify, the Ivy League and what it would mean for their future if they were to gain acceptance to a school of that caliber. And I would definitely consider myself falling into the category of those students who also saw her college education as a pathway beyond financial struggle and potentially emotional struggle as well. Because to me, I saw in my family's experience, at least in my childhood, I associated a lot of the emotional struggles such as anxiety and shame and like intense fears, alcoholism, and also like avoidance behaviors. I saw how, when exhibited by my family members and even myself, so much of it did come back to financial insecurity and kind of the emotional turmoil that comes from not knowing exactly like where your next meal will come from, or knowing that your ability to take a day off just to rest, just to think, just to clean up your house or to make a meal and sit together with your child and catch up with them, that all rested upon you working and working and working like
becomes
6
a luxury
days a
for
week.
some people.
Exactly, yeah. And that's
amazing.
And so rest becomes almost something that you have to work hard enough to deserve, rather than something that is inherent to one's well-being, and therefore, you know, humans should just be given the space to take some rest.
And you saw it was your mother. You said
I did, yeah.
worked 3 jobs?
Yeah, so when she first moved to the US, she worked 3 jobs, I believe, at the same mall, just different shifts. And then my dad, too, he is an Uber driver, and so...
and he didn't necessarily want to leave Russia.
No.
I mean, he was more comfortable there.
He was, yeah.
A business, a small...
Yeah, he had a small little business, and also my parents were in their 40s, and so it's quite a big shift to move to a new country with 2 young children and attempt to learn a language and also find a job that would pay enough. And also there was the concern about not only paying for day-to-day things, but also the affordability of university, because one of the primary reasons that not only my family, but I think a lot of immigrant families move to the US is because a United States education promises you a certain level of financial security and also social agency. And so
I'm glad you used that term. I was going to ask you next thing. You're relating to immigrants' struggles in this country, particularly in New York, and reminding what you're saying too comes the very famous sociologist C. Wright Mills always talked about personal issues becoming larger political issues, which is what you're grappling with too, and we all do to a certain extent. But so you see yourself having gone through, in a sense, the immigrant experience. So how do you feel about the way in which many elements in our society see the immigrants who are trying to make their way here? In a nuanced way, I mean.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think that there are, again, speaking from personal experiences and the people that I've, who are immigrants that I've spoken to, there are certain people who fall under the category of being quite fulfilled just from going to whatever university offers them, you know, the greatest financial aid package, and getting the job that is the most stable and like predictable, and settling down, having a house in the suburbs somewhere, and just raising a family. And that is fine and great. But I also have met people who are not, they're motivated by something else, and they have this kind of like relentless drive to succeed and perhaps prove themselves, because they're aware of how much their families have risked and have given up, and how many challenges they've had to overcome in order to move from a different country here and set up life.
That's a tremendous burden putting on.
It is, yeah. And so
young person, isn't it?
Getting into just any university is not sufficient, and getting just any job is not sufficient, but people are fueled to propel themselves, or want to propel themselves, I guess, to very high positions in various industries, or be a leader in whatever like discipline of study.
You just play the game, and if you're been accepted in the elite schools, you're going to make it.
Yeah.
And that was true back in the 60s too, of the radicals there. But the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, entered into the picture, and we began to question the questions that you've been asking too. Public love, radical love, and are we your brother's keeper? How do you create the beloved community? And all this ruthless. Now you could, as many of your friends and fellow students, become leaders within the community, within the society. And how do you see that possible role in working with people who are still struggling? In other words, do you see yourself as the social expert that's there to help these people? Or you're more an ally, an advocate of what they are really wanting? I don't know if I was clear in that. What role do you think you might want to play in this larger scheme of things as you pursue whatever happens to you in terms of your work, your career, profession? I mean, you are a public intellectual. You already are. Well, yeah, come on. You had the podcast, your speeches, etc. I mean, it's there. You could move on, and so what? The moral question is, what are you going to do with that? And that gets us back to Cornel West, and it's a short time between the womb and the tomb. And the question becomes, well, what are we going to do with that short period of time? American society is so adept at getting us to want more and more materially and commodifying things and relationships that, well, you tell me, it's hard to keep your head straight on all of this, because on the one hand, you're being pulled and tugged there, and on the other hand, there is this feeling of loneliness, anxiety, perhaps. What's it all about?
I think because of that, my vision for my future and how I'm going to contribute has changed so drastically over the past few years. And it went from having a very concrete idea of what position or what I would want to have or what cause I would want to fight for.
Which would be what?
Well, that used to be tied to entrepreneurship and youth mental health. And because I was very interested in reading about founders and how they came to transform an abstract idea for a solution into like a tangible product from a very early age.
I'd like to understand it a little more.
Well, what part?
What you're talking about here.
Okay.
That vulture.
No, that's not.
That's different.
That's different.
Okay. There's so many different interests. All right. But so an entrepreneur within the capitalistic structure to do what?
Well, I wanted to work on improving youth mental health education, which when I first started working on these ideas was still in its most beginning stages because of the stigma around mental illness in the United States.
Tell us about the books that you created, the book.
The boxes?
The boxes for the children, because it's brilliant.
Sure. So towards the end of high school, because my boss at the nonprofit, the mental health nonprofit that I worked for, had 2 young children, and I got to spend some time with them. And I also was quite involved with other youth at a local elementary school, these group of 6th graders at the elementary school that was kind of mostly consisted of low-income students in my town. And when I had, not the mental health podcast, but a different one with 2 of my close friends about self-development, which self-development taught by 16 or 15-year-olds is a little bit like comical, but we tried our best. And we just had episodes about what it means to navigate finding your purpose and how to have meaningful friendships and how to feel like you're part of a community and how to be motivated to...
You were doing this because you weren't getting that from home or the school? You were trying to take up some of the slack?
I was doing it because it gave me hope, I guess, for the future, and made me feel like I was understanding myself more throughout the creative process of creating a podcast with two people who also shared sometimes very different ideas from me. And so I think it was in terms of...
Hope about what?
Hope that the loneliness and the anxiety and the fear that I felt was not permanent, because, and I mean, that all stemmed from many different things. I think, kind of an unstable household and also financial insecurity, I mentioned that, and also just the fear of what happens after high school, because I was, for many, many years, consumed with concerns about how I was going to afford paying for a university, right? And so I knew that my parents wouldn't be able to afford paying for college, especially not a school like NYU. And I think just engaging in dialogue with my peers was something that gave my life meaning beyond all of these other pursuits that ultimately I think I did know deep down didn't mean much. Like, we talk about how, like, top universities have kind of, even though they're presented as prestigious in the media, they've kind of lost their prestige because people realize that, like, your degree, like, is not what determines, like, how fulfilled you are in life. And I think people are looking, at least my peers seem to be looking for something more than just getting a good job, you know, to have, to feel, like, ignited in their soul, you know?
On the other hand, there's not the sort of structure that you really are looking for either. If you just go back again to the boxes that you created, because that's so interesting. To get kids interested in education and mental health, how did you do that? And this was going to be a business, right?
Yeah, because at the time, I was just reading a lot of stories and articles and books about founders and startups, and all of that seemed so exciting to me because it felt like, I don't know, I like to do art as a hobby, and so the design process of product development was very fascinating to me. And I decided to create these subscription boxes that had different items pertaining to different facets of mental health education in them. So there were books, there were like self-guided journals, there were conversation pamphlets for parents so that they can start conversations around mental health with their young children at home. There were DIY activities, basically all to teach or introduce children to the concept of mental health in a
early
playful,
age, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember exactly, but it's like grades 3 to 6, I think.
It was successful, yes?
Well, I launched a prototype and I tested it among families, and then I brought it to some entrepreneurial programs at NYU, but I ultimately decided not to launch it into an official business because I was only my freshman year of college, and I think at that time also going to a place like Gallatin where you're exposed to so many different areas of study, I just started to realize that the world was way bigger than I thought it was, in terms of also thinking about all the different parts of life that affect one's sense of mental well-being. And I thought that the approach to mental health that I had held for so many years was very individualistic. And I think that what I lacked at the time was this understanding of greater power structures and the role of like government and other community organizations in supporting an individual's mental health.
And within the inner city schools too, this would have been used.
Sorry?
The boxes that never fully came to be was also something that all students from whatever backgrounds could use.
Yeah, it was designed for everyone, exactly, right. Yeah. But yeah.
No, right, yeah. So there's a common thread to that journey, and as you move ahead, you're asking the same sort of question that you've been asking throughout your life in a way. The sort of connection and righting some past wrongs and making the world a more livable, lovable place. And first, taking care of yourself and getting that together. And then the next step becomes, well, that's difficult in itself too, but then how does one extend that rich inner life and ideals and values into that larger system, which I don't have to tell you is very ruthless and hypocritical, mm-hmm. and mean and vicious and so on. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but I mean,
no, I mean, I think about that every day.
And so that's again what you know. I think we talked before about how, in a way, every generation might think that what they're going through is unique or not unique, perhaps. Do you feel that? Are you hopeful about the future? Do you feel? I mean, Tom Hayden wrote this back in 1962, the Port Huron statement, mm-hmm. that the fears were that they would be the last generation to even pursue the study, the analysis. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that, that there is hope, that there is a way out of this continuous reification, treating people so impersonally, building walls and the never-ending killing and the militarism and the global climate catastrophes and so on, and the displaced moral commitments that we see taking form, not only with Trump, but the rationalizations. I mean, quite frankly, Biden is sounding a little like Trump now. He's indispensable. Mm-hmm. I need to stay. I mean, so what do you see? We were horribly disappointed in our leaders as well. Mm-hmm. And I know you've done some work on leadership. So what kind of leader do you think is necessary at this time? How do you fit into that? And what are the roles of leaders? If any?
Yeah, I think there is a role for leaders. I just think that perhaps our understanding of what leadership is necessitates a bit of a shift, at least in the media that I consumed growing up about leaders, which pertained particularly to the business world, to startups, venture capital, all of that. Right. It seemed as if a leader was someone who was born, not made. It was someone who was typically also male and came from a pretty privileged background in terms of finances, social network, and education, which are all kind of interconnected in many ways. And also that they possess this really intense conviction that their solution that they proposed for the world will be the thing to single-handedly fix the world's problems.
That's my opening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
a mindset this My way or the highway.
Yeah. It felt as if solutions, in order to get funding and therefore to enable the vitality of your business and the production of your product or service,
Right.
rested on a pretty egomaniacal belief that you could single-handedly fix something and that your solution was totalizing and that it really would resolve so many problems for so many people. And
the idea you could do it by accumulating more and more profits.
exactly, yeah. And also in the venture capital space too, there's this idea that the companies that are the most successful and the most talked about and just the most lauded are the ones that are able to make a 10 times return. So be a unicorn in the space and rise to insane success overnight, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that those kinds of mindsets about
but that's America.
rapid sure.
Get quick, get rich quick.
Okay.
It's the frontier. You go out and you find a gold mine. I mean, Trump's relatives did that.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's what draws people here, and it's the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, it's for many people, as Reverend Barber of the Poor People's Campaign points out, it's been a nightmare for well over half the population, who are, when you start defining poverty as whether or not a family can afford $400 or $500 in case an emergency comes around, you're talking about well over half the population can't do that. At the same time, three families in the country own half the wealth. So now you can shuffle, you talk about the white male and all this. You can have the white female, the black female, the whatever, trans and so on. As long as you have that sort of mentality and mindset and ethos, things aren't going to change that much, or maybe a little around the edges.
Yeah, so my point there was the mindset that I developed about rapid acceleration and production and profit maximization basically was entirely contradictory to what I found out were my actual values, which were much rooted in longevity and sustenance and progress made over time and just over a different
and sanctity.
timeline.
Use that term sanctity.
Yeah.
Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, that's a little bit more tied to some of the ecological restoration and conservation work that I've done.
Longevity of
yeah, sure. It's all tied.
I mean, it's tied together.
Yeah. I mean, sanctity. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No.
No. Go ahead.
No, do you feel that we could keep going the way we're going, and still exist and still have this world around us? Are we heading headlong into a catastrophe, whether it's nuclear armaments through nuclear weaponry or ecologically, the ecological catastrophes? In other words, is your generation, are you in particular, talking about where are you taking these ideas to? What are the avenues that you can? Is the system bankrupt? I mean, Cornell mentioned that at the rally there. All right, both parties cannot be redeemed, right? Do you feel that it still can be? America can be redeemed as presently structured. Maybe that's another way of putting it. I'm asking you all these easy questions here. No, they're not easy at all. But do you feel that the country can still, are we just going to muddle through here? Or how much longer can we just keep muddling through without taking stands on environmental controls and regulations and so on? Can we be redeemed, if you want to look at some spiritual terminology?
I mean, we likely can't go on very long if we continue going down this path. And I think that there's a pretty general consensus around that.
Well, how do you feel about that? Your generation, I mean, you may not live.
Yeah,
okay, it's still.
Yeah,
It's a
I
hell
think
of a feeling, right?
I guess so, but also like, you want to talk about sanctity. I mean, I'm not going to be able to cultivate sanctity in my life if I keep thinking about the destruction of the planet and the social sphere.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, I practice acknowledging the things that are hard, but still implementing some sort of action to balance things out to maintain my sanctity. Do you know? Like, I think it's important to very much acknowledge like the horror that is going on in the world. But I also don't see any other option but to maintain hope and to be optimistic.
Right.
Because I think that nihilism
Prisoner of hope, as Cornell puts it.
Sure, yeah.
The nihilism of Nietzsche.
Yeah.
It's the incapacity and inability to love is the worst that we can feel. No,
yeah.
I got you. I agree with you.
So, I mean, also, I turn to, I think, the smaller things in life, I guess, that are often overlooked in order to kind of keep me sane and motivated and hopeful and optimistic. Like, when you ask me what is it that I want to do with my future, I've been pondering that every single day since I was like 10, 11 years old. And it changes with...
As it should.
But yeah, but I think what I'm focused on right now is just learning how to be an attentive listener and how to express my ideas clearly. And also I'm trying to understand what kind of needs the people around me have and how I can help contribute to fulfilling those needs. Because I don't know, in my experience, I found that before like we even get to really extreme and massive scales of violence or like political unrest or even like mental illness and all of this stuff, I think it comes down to like an inability to actually
to have empathy, perhaps, to really feel and listen to what the other person is saying and feeling.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, you can cut that.
We can cut that. Oh yeah. No, but
no, it's okay.
You're wise beyond your age. I mean, my colleague James Gilligan, the psychiatrist who I've been on the show a number of times, 88 years old, but that's how he started, as a psychiatrist within the prisons. Number one, listen to the story, the narrative of the inmate. And what you'll find is oftentimes, more often than not, they were brutalized, they were dehumanized, they were disrespected, and so on and so on and so on. Starting from that understanding, it makes absolutely no sense to punish them more, to humiliate them more. So out of that simple, not so simple, people don't want to listen oftentimes, but by listening, you can get a perspective that can lead to a much better resolution. So he developed a program within the prison, Massachusetts mental health system, prison system, in which rates of violence and homicide went down to zero. And it was through education and through therapy and so on, and being there. You don't lock somebody up in solitary confinement. You talk to them. It's only going to make them more angry and so on. So it's an important lesson that, again, I wish the various protesters on both sides
Mm.
would talk to,
Mm.
would talk to each other about
Mm.
with the Gaza war.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, gosh, we do have 1 minute left. So, to summarize everything, no, you get the last word on this. You really are a delight to talk with, and you talk about hope, and I feel more hopeful listening to you. And you're really wise beyond your age, and I just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
I really do.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure being on.
It really is. And so take care, and we'll talk some more.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you so very, very much for watching us here on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Bredos, your host. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.